the width is so broad and the depth is so endless. And it's not really a psychological model, and it's not really a spiritual model, and it's not really a healing model. And it can encompass and stretch itself into application in all of those spaces. And so that's why I like to call it an existence model, because it's really about the fruitioning of your own expression and aliveness in each moment. And that requires a kind of metabolic process from conception to actuality. And this is, I think, one of the things that we don't talk about enough, which is that we live in a society that is deeply conceptual and intellectual and very, very low on actuality, maturity, wisdom, and presence. And there's something about that that really dovetails, because the way that the conceptual and the intellectual have hijacked the actual as a kind of shortcut or avoidance strategy for not only the experience of the actual, but the things that you have to do to get to the experience of the actual. And this is kind of the fast food culture of Westernization, for lack of a better way to frame it, which is that you can go to a weekend shamanic workshop, or you can take a bunch of psychedelics, or you can, study Buddhist meditation or whatever, and conceive of the idea that those practices or those interventions will lead you to a place of integration. But what they often do is just amplify the gaps that already exist. And this is because those gaps live at such a fundamental or formative relational template within us that has been in place for so many thousands of years and generations, that it is what I say kind of deeply intrinsic. And when something is deeply intrinsic, it is mostly invisible to us. This is the magic of things that are intrinsic to us, is that we no longer regard them as like things that we see, because they are just the fabric of what makes up who we are and how we relate. And why that's important is because in general, all of our healing or intervention work is above those templates. And we can kind of get a long way by working with some of these, but as everybody in here knows, you meet certain thresholds. And when you're at those thresholds, you can feel like you're reaching for another thing, but somehow it's still leaving this part untouched. And so what we actually have to do is devise ways to creatively interrupt or break the reality structure that those templates have created. And that's not that easy, because we love our realities, and because our realities are not just ours, but they are the realities of the collective. And so again, they become harder to disrupt because they're being reified all of the time, not only by us, but in every interaction we have on the regular. No matter how different our language may be, no matter how much we may have an intention to break them, they're still very positional, which means they hold us in a certain frame that we are used to. And what you experience when you have lived in that frame for a while and tried to interrupt it, or tried to live differently, is usually a lot of recursive, helpless frustration. This is usually like the temperature taking that happens when it's been going on for a while and things aren't changing. Is it's like, what the fuck? Like, I've just spent $10,000 on 9 million retreats, and why the hell am I still experiencing X? And that's because X is living underneath all of that and informing all of the things that you're working with, but kind of doing it on an invisible level. So in this space, we try to look for that level of invisibility, and we try to prime its interruption. And we do that in kind of a number of different ways. We practice with each other. We practice in a group where I may look at what's going on, and then there's unification among the group, because what one person is experiencing, inevitably so is all of us, because we're actually not that fucking unique. And because these things have so much universality to them. And then we also practice steadfastly in our daily life, because that's where the rubber really meets the road, which is, where are we behaving out of fear, scarcity, urgency, restraint, dishonesty? Where is that happening, and where can we choose to interrupt that? Where can we choose to break that? And the breaking of it generally happens in micro moments. We often think about these things as being like, oh my God, I'm going to give up my job and go like to India or something. But like, then people go to India for like 3 years and they come back and they're still assholes. Right? Like, there's 100 stories about this. We all know them, right? Like, I left my husband and I left my like well-paying $1 million job in Hollywood, and I moved to India and I sat with the guru for 2 years, and then you felt so much bliss, and then you come back to America and within 24 hours you're using again. And is that the fault of American culture? Well, kind of. But it's also not. And what happens when you leave that bubble, whatever that bubble is that you have produced for yourself? Because the reality is, moving from now, a little bit past, but now specifically and moving forward, those bubbles, the access to those bubbles is going to be less and less. And the demand for us to act in the now is going to be more and more. And the desperation for that is going to be higher and higher. So we have to have this. We have to be able to act from embodied wisdom. We cannot just act from our minds. And in order to act from embodied wisdom, we have to have eaten a lot of shit. There's no other way. Like, there's no shortcut to that. You have to eat a lot of shit. And you have to work with teachers who really encourage you to see the shit and eat it, which means they're not going to like give you the shortcuts. They're not going to give you the answer. If you find one that is, run. Because your embodied wisdom is attained through your embodiment. No one else is telling you. No one else is giving it to you. And the attainment of it is 3/4 of the wisdom itself, right? It's the journey you take to attain it. Whether that's short or long, one time or millions. Woman